Hello and welcome to the 11th lesson for a living world, and this is the fourth part of the Amazon case study. And the question is, how can we manage the rainforest sustainably? Here's the link for this lesson if you want to use it. This is the GCSE bite-sized link, and the reason I put this one up there is it covers the whole of the GCSE course, which is AQA geography. So if you ever, it's a useful. Some people like bite-sized, some don't, but for those of you that do, it is very comprehensive, and it does have some quizzes and things like that built in. But the theory for today is sustainable management, and this will crop up a lot in the GCSE course. And the way to think about it is really focus on that first word, sustainable. So if something is sustained, it carries on into the future. So here's a couple of examples of where it doesn't happen. So let's just say you start your cross-country run, but you start it by sprinting as fast as you can. Now, everybody knows if you do that, you're not going to be able to sustain that speed. And in fact, if you go off too fast, you might even not finish at all. So that would be something that's not sustainable. And in fact, we often use that language. We say, well, the speed you're going, it's not sustainable. Or maybe at home, maybe you've been sneaking open the fridge and guzzling all the milk or whatever. But if you do that, the chances are they're going to run out really quickly, and everyone else in the family is going to miss out, and you're going to be very unpopular. But also, it would mean that you then have to go out and buy some more. So that would be an example as well of unsustainable consumption of milk, and I'm sure you understand what I mean by that. So from the textbook, when we're applying it to what we're doing, it means using goods and services in such a way sustainably that they are still available for the benefit of people in the future. Okay, so think of the milk analogy. It would be the opposite of that. So if we used it in a way that it didn't all get used up, so that in the future there's always going to be a good supply and we're not going to run out. Okay, now before we move on, we also just need to remind you about scale, because this particular lesson talks about different scales. And this is where we can try to manage the rainforest at an international scale. And what I mean by international is all around the world. So it must involve several countries. But we're also talking about the national scale, which is just one country. So obviously we live in the UK, for example, we're going to focus on Brazil. Or going into next lesson, the local scale, which may well be just a few hectares. Apologies for the spelling mistake there. It should be HECTARES. A few hectares, or maybe even a few miles, but certainly not the size of a country. Right, so what are the options for international management? Remember, this is at least 2 or 3 countries. First of all, we can agree, several countries all around the world can agree on certain rules, and I'll talk you through those in a minute about what we buy from the forest. We can also do something called debt for nature swaps, and finally we can do something, we can do education run by NGOs, and these are non-government organisations. So we're not talking about governments here, we're talking about organisations that are independent, often do a lot of fundraising, and a relevant example for the rainforest is the World Wildlife Fund. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of those in turn to explain them in a bit more depth. Right, so international agreements. So here's an example. I want you to try and remember this one. This is the International Tropical Timber Agreement, 2006. And this meant that for all the countries that signed up to it, it was illegal then to buy timber which was not certified. And that means given a label, given a certificate as having come from a sustainably managed forest, so that you know if it's got that label that it's not come from somebody chopping down trees illegally. Okay, and we have a similar system in this country already for things like buying medicines. You wouldn't go into a chemist and buy medicine that didn't have a safety certificate. So it's quite a common idea. In this case, it's about knowing where the timber has come from to ensure that illegal logging is not encouraged. Okay, because if you just took it, it's like if you just buy things off the internet, you don't ask any questions about where it's come from, you might be encouraging illegal activity. So it's about making sure that everything's above board. There are similar laws for wildlife and plants, so again, to make sure that they haven't been poached. Here's a quick example of some wood from Indonesia, and there you can see the label and you can see the stamp. So it's got a code on it, which can be traced on a database, and there's the little sticker there saying Indonesian legal wood. Well, the second one is debt for nature swaps. Just try and look at the words, and it's if you can just look at those four words, it kind of makes sense. So you're swapping something, you're swapping debt, and you're swapping it for nature reserves. So some countries are so in debt to other countries and their banks that they're desperate to sell rainforest goods to get the money to pay. So it's not necessarily that they want to chop down lots and lots of rainforest, but they've got, basically they need to pay, say, the UK, the USA, or maybe a particular bank, and they need to get the money quickly. And of course, if you've got forest in your country, it's very tempting to think, well, that's a way we can make some money. So debt for nature swaps are a deal, in this example, where Brazil agrees to conserve an area of its rainforest, maybe set up a national park, something like that, in return for not having to pay back everything it owes. So this actually happened in 2010. £13.5 million of Brazilian debt to the USA was swapped for rainforest protection. So what we mean by that is Brazil doesn't have to pay that money back anymore, but what it does do is that they've promised the Americans to set up an area of national park rainforest protection in their own country. This example is actually from Costa Rica. I chose this because it shows 6 different areas that are now being conserved as a result of this deal. Right, finally on this section, education by NGOs. Remember, these are organisations sometimes known as charities that are not governments or companies. World Wildlife Fund, for example, works all over the world in supporting tribes, educating people about how to better conserve the forest, and they do lots of campaigns. They get ideas from people living and working in the forest, that they work very closely with tribal groups and they have a lot of ideas, and then they share them with other countries as well. So they might get ideas, say, from Brazil, and then they might share that idea with Indonesia or Congo or Malaysia. Here's an example of a couple of campaigns. It's a report on the right hand side, and on the left hand side this is about education. So they're really trying to educate people that actually rainforest, it's not just about nature, it's not just about the environment, it's actually, we benefit a lot from the rainforest, and so it's really trying to sort of educate people about how important the rainforests are. At a national scale, remember this is things done by individual countries. There are things you can do, but it really does depend on the government wanting to carry it. We can't force governments to carry out protective measures. The current government in Brazil is not particularly keen on doing lots of protection, but most of the governments in Brazil before that were quite keen. So it does vary. The current situation is quite unusual. Most governments around the world want to do something to help. Here's 4 things. We won't go through all of these in detail, just to be aware. If you can remember a couple of these, it'd be great. First of all, creating national parks. We have national parks in this country, don't we? Like the Lake District, the Norfolk Broads, Peak District. Brazil has definitely done this. Policing the forest to stop illegal activities. That's really down to the government if you think about it. Only giving permission to sustainable schemes. So this is about, you might have heard of this phrase, planning permission. You can't just set up a business any old place. You can't just set up a farm any old place. So the government has a lot of power there about what they allow and what they don't. And finally, spending money on education so that the general public have a better appreciation of how important the forest is. So just very quickly, some images to help you with this. This is a map of national parks in Brazil. You can see there's quite a few there. Some of these are absolutely huge, probably the size of Wales, for example. Some much bigger than we have in this country. The photograph on the right is from a Brazilian national park. These chaps in the picture, these are from the federal police, so that's like the national police. In this case, they come across some illegal loggers, and they were dealing with that, and they will take that equipment away to make sure they can't carry on. And of course, education. So, how do we do the questions? Number one, it says describe the aims of sustainable management. Well, if you can't remember, go back and have a look at slide 4. Okay. Remember, it's about ensuring that the forest is going to be there in the future to support future generations and future wildlife. Question 2. So a bit longer, this one. It's going to take you a bit longer. It says design an educational leaflet aimed at people from HICs, that's rich countries, to explain why the conservation of tropical rainforests is important. So what I want you to do is put yourself in the position of somebody like the World Wildlife Fund and try to persuade people to think about the rainforest. So that's people in the UK, for example. If you have a quick look on the internet on World Wildlife Fund leaflet, you might even find some good examples. Or the Rainforest Alliance is another organisation that does lots of that type of thing. Number 3, corruption. You might not know that word. It means basically where it's bribes, in for want of another word, where money is paid to the government in return for favours. Now, it's not necessarily that you want the government to do something. Sometimes, particularly the rainforest, it's what you don't want the government to do. So it might be that you pay money to the government so that their police just ignore the illegal work that you're doing or something like that. Or maybe you're trying to get permission to set up a huge cattle ranch, and you might pay the government to allow that to go ahead. And question 4, conflict is arguments. Difficult one, this one, because economic development is important, so is conservation. So sometimes the aims of people wanting to make money from the forest clashes with those wanting to conserve it. But it's important just to remember that making money is not a bad thing at all in itself, because if you think about it, if you make money, it means that can be invested in healthcare, schools, roads, people's livelihoods. But the problem is with the rainforest, if you're not careful, you can do lots and lots of damage to the rainforest in trying to raise the money that you need. So it's about getting a balance, and sometimes there's a conflict between the two.